Hello, this is Jason Nazar. I am the co-founder and CEO of Comparably, and I am so happy today to be joined by Linda Findley Kozlowski, the CEO of Blue Apron. Hey, Linda.
Hi, how are you?
Great, and looking forward to our time together, as I know so many folks are as well. So this is a series that we do where we get to talk to amazing executives like Linda about their journey, their lessons learned, and the theme I like to talk about called If I Knew Then. And so this is our time to really share perspective and advice for all of you. For those of you that have been listening to this series, I think you know that I'm a serial entrepreneur. I run Comparably, which is an employee review site where people publicly rate and review their companies and employers. I'm a pretty active investor and board member here in Southern California. And one of the reasons, Linda, that I wanted to make sure that you and I had a chance to chat is, in addition to everything you do at Blue Apron, you've got this incredible background at so many name brand technology companies, an active board member involved in the community. And so I just think there's so much that people are going to get, from the time today. So thank you again. And I'd love to maybe just start in your own words. How do you talk about Blue Apron today?
Sure. So, well, first of all, thank you very much for having me. I'm happy to be here and share anything that might be helpful to people kind of going forward. But Blue Apron really is, the first meal kit in the United States. So it was really the pioneer in the United States of shaping the meal kit industry. And Blue Apron is about bringing high quality, fresh, amazing ingredients, incredible recipes into people's homes, so that they have one less thing to think about when it comes to their nightly meal planning. One of the biggest sources of tension for families is that 4 p.m., what are we going to have for dinner? There are gender lines and discussions over who has to make that decision, who prepares the meal, who cleans up the meal. And honestly, for us, dinner time should really be a time to connect with your family and with loved ones. And so we want to make that much lower stress because you already have a bunch of amazing recipes at your fingertips. A lot of fun because we take a lot of the work out of planning and deciding what to have for dinner and going to get the ingredients and really just bring back that joy of connecting over dinner time by the fact that you can cook something at home. Your family members can learn how to cook. People can do it together, and you can share a really great meal with really unique and incredible recipes without having to do a lot of the work behind it.
Yeah, I've been a customer over the years. It's incredible. It makes the cooking experience so enjoyable. It makes it something that you look forward to as an activity. To me, one of the things that was so is, as a consumer myself, in the past, I think I thought about it as a privilege or a luxury.
Yeah.
Now, over the last 5 months, it's a necessity. I'm just curious to see how you all think about that and how you've talked about it. It must be so impactful to be a business that is so much more needed because of COVID these last couple months.
It's interesting because, I would argue, and of course I'm biased, I would argue that it's actually been needed for a really long time. If you think about it, food and what you eat and what you serve your family is one of the most important decisions you can make on a daily basis. Where did the ingredients come from? What are the quality of the ingredients? How are we going to spend that time together, understanding that every family and every couple is stretched for time these days, even when staying at home. People always say, oh, you have so much more time when you're staying at home. Everyone I know who has kids and obligations has less time staying at home because there's no real line between work and personal. And also you're trying to homeschool your kids, you're trying to manage through all these different activities. And so I think people are more time starved than they ever have been in this situation, not to mention quite stressed. So for me, I joined Blue Apron because I looked at it as a fairly essential product no matter what, for a few key reasons. One is health. When you think about what you put into your body, there's a lot of evidence that as long as you're cooking, it's already going to be better than anything that's processed or anything that's sort of, being delivered, et cetera, because you can control the ingredients, you can control the salt, you can control the butter. But also you're working with fresh ingredients and you're sort of starting from that initial ground. And that's relevant at all times. Then in addition to that, I think that it's an essential product because it really does help reduce the waste in your household because of the fact that we're bringing in only the amount that you need for that recipe. You're not actually throwing away extra ingredients where you had to buy too much of a certain ingredient for a certain recipe because that's the only quantity that it came in. You're able to really manage through and use everything that comes in the box. So I think that's also a really important thing that people are finding more and more important these days. What's happening with stay-at-home orders and/or lack of availability of some eating out options, as well as just frankly general concern over too much public exposure in crowded places, is people are finding it even more essential now because of the fact that it's an easy way to get high quality ingredients with great recipes and ideas to take sort of that decision making pressure off of your day, have it come directly to your home. But also, frankly, the fact that because we source so much directly from the producers, the ingredients in your box are coming in much less contact with humans than anything that comes into the grocery store, because it's going from the producer to our fulfillment center, and then our fulfillment center straight into the box to you. So that just removes one more concern from the variable there. And from a cost perspective, we really look at it as trying to provide as much value as we can in the box. And that is everything from keeping our prices as reasonable as possible as grocery prices are continuing to go up during the pandemic, but also making sure that we are reducing that waste, so you're not wasting money on ingredients that you're not using, and saving you that time. That, time is money. It still is true. And so how are we reducing that pressure of time for you so that you can just focus on your family? And so so that for us makes it more essential than luxury at this point, but yet with the enjoyment of something that kind of rivals a dinner out at a great restaurant. These recipes are meant to really satisfy in a way that that not every recipe can, because it's got layers of flavor in it and ingredients that you might not even be able to find even if you did want to go to the store.
Yeah. We were a family that ate out a lot. We would use Uber Eats and Postmates incessantly. And we've pretty much over the last 4 months only cooked at home.
Yeah.
And it's been amazing. We've been a healthier family. We spend more time together. I really don't want to go back. And we've used Blue Apron during that time. It's been great. I think a lot of folks' habits and spending is going to meaningfully change here, even if COVID tomorrow we're going to go away, which I don't think any of us think is going to happen right now.
I think it's really interesting because we're hearing that a lot from people, which actually gives me a lot of hope. I mean, honestly, it's a very difficult time for a lot of families as they're trying to juggle everything that they have coming at them in the world, plus just the emotional pressure of a pandemic. I mean, that is on its own hard enough, but then you have all the logistics aspects of how you adjust to a new life. But if there's something that I look at that's really positive coming out of this, is the number of people that I've heard say, you know what, I've reconnected with my family and I've had so much more time to connect with them. And I didn't even realize how far I had drifted from that. I didn't even realize how, we all knew we had busy schedules, but treasuring the things that are actually really important and refocusing on those things based on kind of being forced to for a certain perspective. And so while there's lots of uncertainty still left in the world, something that's very interesting and we see people saying a lot is, I'm more confident cooking at home than I used to be. I plan to cook at home more post, whatever the end of, who knows what the end of this looks like or when it is, but I do plan to cook at home more. But also just this concept of, there are certain things that matter to me most in life now, and I've had a chance to relook at those, and that's really fantastic. That gives me a lot of hope for what's coming next, frankly.
Yeah, that's great. All right, well, we're going to get back to Blue Apron in a bit, and also just kind of how you're thinking about the overall environment, company culture. One of the things I always think a lot about, and this theme that we do this interview series around, is if I knew then. And it's never the things that we don't know that get in our way. It's things that we don't know that we don't know. You've got this amazing career. You were at Evernote and Etsy and Alibaba and on the board of Ralph Lauren and Style Seat. I kind of want to go back to look backwards over your career, and we'll do a bit of a timeline in a moment. But what would you say was the part of your career that was maybe the most challenging, and where do you feel like you learned the most? And I know one of the big things that you and I had been talking about before is this theme that you have of taking risks in your career. And I'd love for you to share that for a little bit as well.
So I definitely think that taking risks is really important to sort of think of what might have been the most transformative part of my career would likely be my role with Alibaba and taking that role on, partially because it's an incredible company with that's doing just amazing things, but has been for quite some time. But also because for that role, I was living in Hong Kong. I was traveling all over the world. Now I've always traveled heavily for my jobs, but that was definitely the most that I've ever traveled. I completely immersed myself in a different type of company to really see it from the inside out in a different country, and frankly embraced it. And when I took on that role, something that was very important to me is you see in a lot of international roles, no matter where they are, doesn't matter. People come in and say, you're doing everything wrong. Let me tell you how we do it, whatever we is. It can be in the US, it can be in Europe, it can be wherever the other place is. Let me show you how we do it because we do it right. And when I took on that role, I very distinctly had the same view that I have when I meet people or when I'm in any other situation, which is I am joining this organization because there is something happening there that's very interesting and that's very right. And it doesn't mean, I mean, everyone's hiring someone to help sort of adjust or fix or move something forward. But I wanted to go in and say, I want to understand what's working well. I want to understand what's making this such an interesting company to exist, to grow, et cetera. And this was in 2009. So it was right when Alibaba was beginning to get known in the US. It wasn't known as well in the US as it is now. But that approach of coming into something rather than saying, I have to figure out how to tear this all apart and fix it, and coming in and saying, I'm going to learn as much coming into this organization as they're going to learn from me, I think is actually an important perspective, because I think it's very common for people to come into a role and say, I've got to figure out how to prove myself. I've got to figure out how to change things, shake things up, make my mark, all those sorts of things. And I believe that the best way that you can make your mark is to actually take something that's great and figure out how to apply the best of what you know to make it even better. And so Alibaba was a transformative place and role for me because it truly was putting myself in a different set of shoes and seeing something from a completely different perspective. And that's shaped a lot about how I've approached every role since then.
Was there anything that you felt like overall culturally or that company did different than US-based companies? Like in the 80s and 90s, right? We got this concept and theme of Kaizen from Japanese companies in the automaking industry of continuous improvement. What did you feel like that you learned and that they just do maybe fundamentally differently than the way we think about business in the United States?
Well, we can talk about it as fundamentally differently, or we can talk about all businesses in phases. So what I saw when I joined Alibaba was very much what I would call the entrepreneurial spirit that drove a lot of innovation in technology before that. So I think at the time that I joined Alibaba, I was living in Silicon Valley at that particular point. And I think a lot of companies had started to value more of the safe route and more, larger companies. This is when a lot of the bigger companies were sort of getting their true heft as tech giants. And so you lost a little bit of that innovation. It was all of a sudden everybody is I'm the Uber of something, or I'm the Google of something, or I'm the, and it was always that comparison to that larger company. Whereas I felt at Alibaba that there was a lot of that true entrepreneurial spirit. What was really like, what can we do that is uniquely ours, and push that forward. So now there's always, of course, learnings and sharings across different companies and different industries, that's the way it should be. But I think that it felt much more risk taking at that particular point as a culture than what was currently existing in Silicon Valley at that point. And a lot of that also was the timing. This was 2009. 2008 was kind of a rough period, and there was a lot of that was understandable as well, but that was important. The other thing that I thought was really important, and some companies do this in the US or in other parts of the world, but I really think it builds incredible teams, is to be very open-minded to people shifting between roles, and to encourage learning multiple parts of the business as a leader of the organization. Alibaba was also where I made my transition from really the world of consulting and that side to marketing and operations. That was really where that happened, because Alibaba embraces encouraging that kind of change and really driving people into trying new roles and pushing themselves further, and frankly, well-rounded, working in a lot of different parts of the company, so that as you continue to grow in the organization, you have a broader skill set and a deeper understanding of the business. So I think that's critical for businesses now, to not just assume because somebody comes in one lane, that's the lane they should always be in. I think being open to having leaders that have had multiple careers inside one company is actually really great for your business long term. Obviously, you always need to make sure you have the right skill sets, but I think that's actually just a smart way to operate.
Yeah, it's fascinating to hear. I think we always pride ourselves as US-based companies that we're the most entrepreneurial, and as you get to scale, you look at US companies versus European companies and how much less bureaucracy they have. To hear that, hey, here's this Chinese-based company that was out entrepreneuring, US-based companies. You reminded me of something you told me before we had the interview, which is that one of the defining characteristics of your career is that most roles that you took, you were taking either a pay cut or it was like the least amount of money you had taken. I just think that's so fascinating, because I often think that people early on in their career over-optimize for how much they can make in the short term, and often under-optimize how much they can make in the long term. Would love to get your thoughts on how and why you made those decisions, and obviously they've paid off well for you.
Yeah, my primary decision-making process when I think about any role that I'm taking on is, do I fundamentally believe in this product in this company? Because if I don't fundamentally believe in the product in the company, then I can't work as hard as I do. Like, none of us have, punch the clock, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. jobs where we're sort of saying, okay, now everything is shut off. We all put so much more hours, time, and effort into what we're doing. And I can't imagine doing that if I didn't really, truly believe in that company and that product and that team. So that's always been my number one decision-making process. And yes, it's true. Like, every job I've ever taken pretty much has been the lowest paying of the options that I was offered at that particular time, at least for the short-term income.
And was that ever a hard decision? I mean, did you ever really agonize over, well, should I take the extra money now or the opportunity that I believe in more? Or was it just something you felt like, I got to go with the opportunity I'm more excited about?
I think there is some difficulty with it, but I guess one thing that's important to understand is I'm just somebody that fundamentally believes that as long as you're doing something you are truly passionate about, you will drive it further and faster than you will if it's just something that you're in for the money. I also strongly believe that you're in a situation where it's very easy to make a decision for yourself often, but also you would not be a great human if you didn't take into consideration the other people in your life. So, spouses, partners, families, whatever it is. So I can't say it's super easy and that I just snap my fingers and say, here's the right decision, because there's a certain amount of risk with it. But I do also think that, candidly, I'm a much more pleasant person to live with when I love what I'm doing. And the addition of another car in the driveway doesn't necessarily impact that or not. It's really much more about, do I really believe in this? And is it something that I'm really passionate about? So it honestly probably should have been a harder decision for me to make the choice to go with something that is more of I have skin in the game, and this is really a long-term investment of I'm successful if the business is successful. But candidly, it's just not that hard of a decision for me, because I just I am somebody who will. There is no job that's beneath me. There's nothing that I think is too little to do. So if I were ever in the situation where I just needed to make a decision differently, I have no fear of that work. Yeah. So it's more of like, I might as well choose the thing that that is most fulfilling to me and that I'm going to put 100% of my energy behind, because that is automatically going to increase the chances it's successful. But certainly if you have families, if you have, kids going to college or something, there's certain considerations you have to have. But my experience over time is if you only make a decision based on the money, the immediate sort of guaranteed money, then you tend to wind up in a situation where you're kind of paying for it personally.
In addition to Alibaba, was there another time you felt like you just took a really big risk, as either in a new role you were taking or at an existing position? Like, what was an example of that?
Well, I honestly think I've, to a certain extent, often taken risks. So, when I took the role at Etsy, I moved from California to New York for the role. And Etsy was at a stage where it was looking for, a new scale and a new sort of turnaround situation. And so a lot of people thought that was an incredibly risky move. I didn't see it as a very risky move, because frankly, I just thought Etsy was one of the most incredible businesses out there, and had such a unique offering that it felt less risky to me. But it was actually quite risky, because it included uprooting my life personally and professionally. And a whole new network of people, et cetera. So it was risky in that sense. But again, I just think that's where growth comes from. And my family's originally from the East Coast. So, and part of my family is originally from New York. So coming back to the East Coast after 16 years of being away from the East Coast, actually didn't feel that foreign to me. I think I'm one of those people that finds something amazing about every place I am. And I just think New York is incredible. I think San Francisco is incredible. I think Hong Kong is incredible. I think my hometown of Greensboro, North Carolina is incredible. So I tend to just approach it that way. And then, of course, coming to Blue Apron is, we've openly discussed multiple times a lot of the past of Blue Apron and how it's come to where it is. And I just all I saw when I looked at it was, this is an incredible brand. This is one of the best brands out there still. It's the number one most recognized, most tried brand in the space, and has an incredible product and an incredible team and an incredible amount of opportunity. So for me, the risk would be I'm more concerned about the risks of what could I have done that I missed out on because I was too scared. And that to me is more of a risk than anything else.
Yeah. It's interesting. I get a lot of folks when they're thinking through like what they should study in college, asking like, hey, what's the right major for me? And I always just say, do what you love, study what you're most interested in, and you can take your career in any direction. You've got this awesome background in journalism, both with a bachelor's and a master's. Did you plan to have a career in journalism, and where did you find it took the first, left or right turn from there?
So when I was younger meaning even pre-college, I think my dream was to be a foreign correspondent. And I thought Christiana Manipur was the most amazing person on the face of the earth, and that's what I wanted to be. And so that's actually why I started out in journalism. But the other thing about journalism is I do strongly believe that communication and the ability to tell stories and the ability to help people understand circumstances or things that are difficult to understand is an incredibly important skill set, no matter what you're doing.
Yeah.
And so I was always drawn to that. And I've also been, frankly, particularly drawn to the influence of media on businesses and businesses on media. So there was a very natural connection there as well. But for me, journalism was more about that ability to really understand the nuances of a story and to, frankly, look at it in a very neutral way. back when I was in journalism school, both undergraduate and graduate, the training really was about actually removing your own opinion from your stories. It was, how do you objectively look at things, give people the facts so that they can make decisions on their own. And I actually think that's an important skill set to understand, to be able to look at things from as much of a neutral perspective as possible. And we can argue all day long about how things have changed or not changed in the world of journalism going forward, but that was really the journalism that I was taught. And that's how I've approached so much of my life, and frankly, my personal relationships as well, in looking at it from that lens. So I do, however, remember very clearly when I was finishing my master's thesis, and one of the advisors on my master's thesis was a professor in the MBA program at the same school, which is one of the best MBA programs as well. And we were sitting there, and he said, "Do you realize that as a journalism master's student, you will graduate probably making less money than the bachelor's of business administration students will be making, even though you've been working for several years before you even got your master's?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "So why are you doing it?" Why not just get an MBA? And I, MBAs I think are fantastic and have no issue with that. But for me, it was just more of the coursework that I had to take, which included finance, which included being able to interpret legal rulings based on how they affected freedom of speech, media law, things like that. All the work that I had to do for my master's degree, I still feel like I use on a regular basis, including just trying to be able to explain the business to either investors or customers or employees.
Yeah. All right. So I think there are going to be a lot of people out there that say, I want to have a career like Linda's had. And what I often try to do is think of like, what are the components that, broke it down if someone else wanted to try to model. So there are a couple of things you said I thought were really fascinating. One was no jobs too small. The second was that you didn't take the jobs that offered you the most money, but the opportunities you were most passionate about. You were willing to uproot your life and take risks and move to different parts of the country, different parts of the world. What else? If you had to try to identify the kernels of what led to the success that you've had, which obviously you're this amazingly smart and awesome person, but I generally believe that it's not somebody's raw materials that make them successful, but the things that they choose to do with the gifts that they've been given. And if that's our model for success, what are those other things that you felt like you did differently than your peers that put you on the path that you're on today?
So one of the other important things, you're correct about all the things that you said that were part of that formula. In addition to that, one of the things that's factored into every choice I've ever made about my jobs includes having open and honest conversations during the interview process about what my long-term goals are and what the company's long-term goals are.
During the interview process.
During the interview process. And here's why. I believe strongly that part of what lets you develop new skills, accelerate your career, and truly have experiences that transform your next opportunities has to do with the openness of the leadership you're working with. So, for example, when I've joined a company and I've said, here's what I want to do long-term, which is operations and running, basically running a company. Here's what I want to do long-term. Here's what I'm doing now. And here's the experiences I'd like to have that I think I need in order to be able to do that next piece. And assuming you're talking to HR, the leadership, et cetera, of the company that you're talking to, if they're immediately like, no, we need someone who's only going to be an accountant and you will never do anything but be an accountant. I'm using an example that I am not, but then that's probably not going to be the place that you can find that opportunity. So you'll find that you often, when you interview with companies, especially smaller companies, et cetera, they are very quick to promise things like, oh, you'll be able to build a team, you'll be able to have all these resources, etc. That to me is always a little bit of a red flag, because oftentimes it's really hard to know how big of a team that person is really going to be able to build. It's going to be difficult to know what those resources look like as the business changes. So oftentimes those are things that are put forward because you have people who think, okay, that is the way I develop my career, is I need someone to promise me I'm going to build a team and I'm going to have resources. And then oftentimes they're going to be disappointed when they get 6 months in and the business has had to adjust somehow, and maybe they get one person or two people, they can't build an entire team, or maybe the budget isn't growing as fast as they thought it was going to. And you wind up with a disconnect. For me, what's more important is when I've taken on roles, I've said, okay, here's what I want to achieve for you right now. And here's what I want to help accomplish in this company now. Here's what I want to do midterm, and here's what I want to do long-term. And if people are open to that, then you know you're working with someone who's going to be open to helping you develop your career and figure out how to get those experiences you need for the next path. Mm-hmm. So, the other common piece of advice, which is not just me, although it's definitely something that I believe in, is, have your day job, but be willing to take on other projects in your work that will help you develop. And I think that's a valuable piece of advice. But if you aren't working for an organization that supports you taking on those additional projects, then it doesn't really matter how willing you are to do it. So I've been very, very lucky to work with lots of people over my career that were always willing to look longer term and say, well, hey, if we achieve these 5 things, then yes, we can do this. And that to me was way more important than you're going to have a big budget, you're going to have a big team, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the more critical things that I've done that I think is important. Something else that I've done that's a little controversial for some people is I've always left a job before I start looking for another job.
Wow.
Yeah, always. Well, I guess I shouldn't say always. I think there was a time when I was in my teen years that I didn't, but, and that's really for a few different reasons. But one is I tend to put so much of my energy into what I'm doing that it would be next to impossible to truly focus on looking for another job while you're doing that, because how can you adequately evaluate any opportunity while you're giving 110% of yourself? And I know that's mathematically impossible. Let's just say 100% of yourself to your current role. Secondly, I think that you don't always make great decisions when you do them under those circumstances. So when you step back and you reflect on, here's what I was doing and here's what my goal was next, and you have some brain space to say, I'm going to take the time to look for that without the shroud of, hey, I've got this meeting at 5:00 that I've got to get back for, or something along those lines. I just think you make better decisions. There's a lot out there's actually no grass at all on the other side of the fence.
Yeah. You got me thinking about a topic when you started talking about interviewing, which is, my guess is you've been directly or indirectly involved in hiring thousands of people.
Yeah.
And the world has just changed a lot in the last 4 months, and there are a lot more candidates out there for every role, especially in the kinds of companies that we run, these digital, fast-growing businesses. What do you think are the big mistakes that people do in the interview process that maybe unknowingly shoot themselves in the foot? And the candidates that you've seen that just nailed an interview, that just knocked your socks off, what did they do differently than other folks?
Well, it's funny because when you first started asking me that question, what I was thinking you were asking me was what the interviewer does right and wrong, not what the candidate does right and wrong. So I can sort of talk from both sides. I definitely think, I mean, this won't surprise you based on what we've already been talking about. If the first thing that the person who's interviewing for a role asks about is title and salary and, you know, levels of power, then I don't necessarily think they have the right level of motivation. That's obviously important, and everyone should be making what they deserve, and they should be titled correctly, and they should be positioned correctly in the business. So I think that that's important. But if it is the first thing that comes up in a conversation, then they're probably not somebody who's really there for the mission of the organization and to work with the team. So unsurprisingly, that's probably one of the biggest ones. I will, and then I'm going to use this a little bit as both candidate and interviewer. I love candidates who have thoughtful questions, not only prepared, but on the fly. And there's always that balance of like, you never want someone who's only talking to the point that you never get a chance to ask them a question. That's not good. But someone who is asking the right questions tells me almost as much as me asking them questions in certain circumstances, because I understand how they're going to approach any decision that they're making going forward. So I do really look at that. And I also, as an interviewer, I tend to prepare questions that also invite them to ask a lot of questions along the process so that I can learn how they would actually handle those decision-making processes. That being said, I will say one more pet peeve, and also, you know, the flip side of it is a good thing, is a pet peeve are people who keep talking about things in generalities and are unable to give specific examples of how they impacted something. It's very easy to exist in a world right now where you have candidates that were merely present when something happened in their organization. They didn't actually have a role in it, but they use it as an example. I have before actually had someone come in who had worked at a previous company that I had been at and basically talked about working on a project that in fact I had done before they got to the company. And so that's always that moment where you're like, wait, you're literally telling me that your experience is something that I know you didn't do because I actually did it when I was there before. And that's always surreal because you assume they know where you were before, and so that you might have some knowledge, but that does happen a lot. So I think the flip side of that is when someone can very specifically not only say to me, here's what I did and here's what I achieved, and by the way, here are the people I collaborated with and how their roles interacted with my role in this, that I trust them a lot more because they're not trying to take credit for the entire thing. They're being very clear that it was a team effort and very clear what their role in it was. It gives me a much better idea of what their skill set is. But also I'm going to trust a lot more that not only can they work with a team, but in fact that that thing that they did, they know how to do well because they are clear about what their role was versus other people's roles. And so that type of situation I think is great. All of this leads me to a big part of how I think about candidates is I always try to divide between teachable and unteachable skills. Teachable skills are, you can teach someone how to write. You can teach someone how to analyze a paid marketing campaign. You can teach someone a lot of different sort of hard skill sets. You want them to have expertise. You want them, especially for certain roles, you can't just hire anyone for a job. But what you can't teach someone is, do they intuitively know how to be empathetic and communicate with a variety of different people? Are they honest? Are they genuine and authentic in how they represent themselves to their teams? How do they think about people development of the team below them? Those are the things that you can't always teach someone because there's a certain amount of innate bias of how people behave. That's a natural instinct. And so I try to find people, obviously I want expertise, but more importantly, I want people that I know are going to be able to behave in a way that I would support within the organization as they think about the importance of their relationship to their team.
Yeah, I think that's amazing. I think what you talked about of asking questions is so important. I often tell folks, if you just do one thing in an interview and nothing else, which is ask the person that's interviewing you what are you most looking for in this candidate?
Yeah.
They'll give you the complete cheat sheet of what to
Yeah.
talk about in the dress, and
Yeah.
stay focused on those items. All right,
Yeah.
I want to take a metaphorical time machine here. Part of this theme that's really important and interesting to me is if I knew then. So I want to go back to your 20s and 30s. And if you could give yourself one piece of career advice from those times, what would it be? So for example, for me, if I could go back in my 20s, I went to grad school, I went to business school and law school, and if I had to do it all over again, I probably wouldn't have. I would have just tried to start, a larger company sooner. And if I could go back in my 30s, I would have tried to convince myself and tell myself that it's not about how much of a star I could be in the company, but how well I could recruit and make other people stars around me, which is a lesson it took me a long time to learn, and I'm probably still learning it now. If you could have a conversation with your 20-year-old self and then with your 30-year-old self, what would be the big advice that you would give to those Lindas?
Eat better. No, I'm kidding. I actually ate pretty well even then too. I've always actually liked food that people consider to be healthier food. There's actually a bunch of things. So one of the obvious ones is take more risks. Although I've always been pretty good at that, but I do think that that's something that's important. So I think that every 20 and even 30-year-old, potentially even more 30-year-olds than 20-year-olds, are very, very concerned with looking smart, looking like they know everything, looking like they've got it figured out, not because they're trying to be arrogant, but because you're trying to position yourself as skilled in your job. And I think that does a disservice. I think it also winds up causing leaders down the road that also aren't willing to admit that they don't know everything. The reality is nobody knows everything. Nobody knows everything. In your 20s and 30s, that is the ultimate time of license to learn. So that's actually the time that you should be saying, I know how to do this, but I don't know how to do that. I'd love to work with you. I'd love to learn this. I'd love to understand this more. Can you take a little extra time? It isn't always going to pay off. I'm just going to be really clear that sometimes it will backfire because someone will just be impatient. But if someone's impatient with that, then they're probably not a great manager. But that's the time that you actually can really say, I need to learn and I need to absorb. And so you should be asking a lot of questions, and you should be developing your expertise at the same time you're also willing to admit where you don't have expertise. Mm-hmm. And I think I fell into that trap a little bit myself too when I was in my 20s. It's a little bit of the imposter syndrome, but I think a little bit even further, which is this concept of if I don't put forward that I know everything, then I'm never going to be able to advance. And the reality is nobody knows everything. And so you wind up just saying dumb things because you're trying to talk about something you don't have any expertise on. So it's much better to say, well, that's not really my area of expertise. I'd love to know more, and I'd love to understand how you're thinking about it. Here's my area of expertise, and here's where I can really contribute. So I think that that's probably one thing that I would tell my younger self. Something else I did tell my younger self and I acted on was what I mentioned before about leaving a job before I look for another one. I think that in the time that I was young, I was under the impression that if you ever had any gap in your resume, it would just be terrible. You'd never get another job. And I will say that when I'm hiring people, I look for people that have the confidence to either take a break or travel or do something for a period of time. No, if it's a serial challenge, then maybe not. And I'm not talking about it. I'm fine with breaks in between jobs because, again, I have the philosophy that if you're taking a break, you're able to more directly think about what you really want to do next and you're going to be more committed to it. But I do think that when I was younger, I was very concerned about making sure that I checked all the right boxes. And it turns out, in fact, that actually isn't the best way to go about it. because you don't have the perspective. You tend to make decisions under duress, and you tend to make decisions from the wrong part of your brain. And so that was a piece of advice that I did give myself in my 30s. And then that's when I changed the way that I started thinking about my career, and it dramatically changed the types of opportunities that I took on.
I think a lot of times we aggrandize like the founder CEO, and people have CEO titles when they're teenagers now, and one of the things that I look back on and regret is when I sold my last company, DocStock, to Intuit. I think I just so fundamentally saw myself as an entrepreneur that I was already thinking about what I was going to do next, instead of getting all I could out of that experience and helping them as much as I could. I pretty much stayed about a year. You've got this interesting perspective where you're the COO of two well-known technology brands, head of marketing at international. I'm sure you looked at the CEO and knew that you'd be in that spot soon enough. I'm curious, as you were in the non-CEO role, what did you tell yourself? Okay, when I'm there, here's how I want to act. Here's what I want to do differently. What were the mental notes that you made to yourself that that you act on today?
Oh gosh, that's a whole nother discussion that could last another hour. But I've been lucky that I've worked for some pretty incredible people that I admire and often want to emulate. I've also, I think, been very lucky that I was never under the delusion that the CEO job was an easy job, or was it? Because I think you have some people that say, I want to be the CEO because I want to be in power. I want to have control. And the reality is, as a CEO, your primary job is to eliminate all, barricades for your team. You want to make sure that they have everything they have to get things done. So in many ways, you work for them. And so it's an incredibly hard job, and it's an incredibly lonely job. And I think that that's something that you universally hear from a lot of different people, partially because you want so badly to make it the best possible thing you can for your team. And that's not always within your control. So I think that the things that I learned and the things that I took away from the CEOs that I worked with in the past, and also the things that I set forward for myself when I wanted to take this on myself. So first of all, you do genuinely need to connect and be yourself with your team, with the customers, there's so many books and so many classes on power presence and what you should be as a CEO and how you should present yourself and when you should negotiate and when you shouldn't negotiate. The reality is everyone can see through anything. So you're much better off just thinking about what are your unique skill sets and how do you want to lead and bringing that to the table, because anything else you try to do that you perceive to be the right way to be a leader based on, textbook concepts is likely going to fall flat. Even if it turns out to be a good thing to do, if it's not authentically you, then it's not going to work. So, so I think that aspect has been something that I've learned from a lot of people that I've worked with over time. And I think that's been incredibly important. There's an extension to that, which is, and it's also connects to the earlier part of the conversation, is nobody's good at everything. So the only way you're ever going to be successful in any role is to surround yourself with people that are smarter than you at the things that you aren't as good at. Like, that is what a team is about. And that's actually what you want, because when you have that, then you have a team that's actually pushing each other and balancing each other and pressuring each other in different ways that are good for everybody's growth and good for the company. And so I think that that's sort of an extension of that. And again, I've seen that multiple times. I do think another aspect that I've learned over the years is the best CEOs that I've worked with are the ones who don't settle. It's always very hard because you're constantly pushing and you're constantly saying, well, what else can we do? What more can we do? What else can we do? It's tiring to a certain extent, but it's that pushing that, while uncomfortable for a period of time, is actually what drives innovation and new ideas and competitive advantage. So So it needs to be balanced. But for me, what was important in thinking about this role is truly this idea of leading a company with a concept of making sure that you are balancing pushing and leading with empathy. And over time, as many people have already done, removing this stereotype that the CEO is distant from the team or distant from the customers, and reconnecting back with the business. And so that's, again, part of the reason why I've always chosen jobs that I'm very connected to is I don't think I can be good at my job if I don't have conversations with the customer, if I'm not hands-on with the product, if I'm not really, really involved. And I think most CEOs are drifting that direction now. I think that's actually pretty common. But for me, I can't imagine any other way to work than that.
Yeah, I think that's incredibly thoughtful. Just a couple more questions with the time that we have. You know, one of the big reasons that I started Comparably was because I wasn't a good culture leader early on, and I didn't value the importance of culture. And I think I didn't understand for the first half of running a venture-backed business how critical it was and how it permeates every aspect of the business. And then I got obsessed with what builds a great company culture and how to measure that and how to understand other companies' cultures. And obviously there were other platforms before us that, you know, did things like employee reviews and help with employer branding. But I wanted to try to create a platform that just really measured, as you talked about from your journalism experience, as objectively as possible, and the people that are there doing the work, you know, what kind of experience they're having. You know, what do you do today to build a great culture at Blue Apron? And obviously that's gotten a lot more challenging, you know, during COVID and so many of us working remotely. How would you describe your culture, and what are the things you feel like you try to lead to make it as great as possible?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. And I'll say I would argue it's even more interesting when you're coming in as a CEO, you know, when you're not the founder of a company, but you're coming into a company that existed for a period of time before, because there's some culture that's there, there's some that's being created. And then also, frankly, when you're coming in during a time of a transition and a transformation for a business, there's always that question of what do you keep, what do you add, what do you, when it comes to culture, and it's a challenging question. And I'll also admit that, like, I think culture is one of the most important possible things in an organization, just driving the right culture of accountability, of urgency, but also of passion and quality. Like, there's a lot of different areas, communication, etc., that are incredibly important. And then something like a pandemic hits or something else happens, and you start to get frustrated because you want to push those things forward so quickly, but there's so many other things that just have to be done, including safety. And just you have to prioritize those things. And even in a company that's transitioning and returning to growth, there's certain, like, financial obligations and other things that you just have to make sure that you're, you know, crossing your T's and dotting your I's. And so I'll admit that if it's one thing that really bugs me right now is I wish I could be doing more on the culture on a daily basis and really focusing on that a lot more, because I think it's critical. That being said, from a Blue Apron perspective, Blue Apron is one of the most incredibly team-oriented companies that I've worked with, as far as the passion for what we do and the passion for how every function fits into what we do is incredibly high. The ability to collaborate on new ideas, because the company's been through so many changes, it's like what I'm looking to encourage next, and what I think is the most important step next, is making sure that we're really connecting those teams so that the collaboration cross-team is very seamless. And that's something that I think a lot of companies struggle with, because you get people who are very heads down and they're focused on their area. And particularly in times of pressure and stress, there's a lot of like, wait, who's doing this, or what's happening here? Breaking down the any blocks to communication and collaboration between teams is probably the most critical thing right now for me when I think about culture, because this is a company and this is a team that gets very excited when they understand the full picture of the business.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that I love about Blue Apron is it is both a technology company and a food company. It's both a, it has a manufacturing aspect to it, but it also has a very innovative sort of digital aspect to it as well, in the direct-to-consumer platform. And some of the coolest moments are when you see those two things come together in a true understanding of how the product gets made completely from end to end. As I'm sitting here in our, in one of our fulfillment centers, and I try to get as much of the team from the corporate side exposed to the physical creation of the product as well, and vice versa, in order to make sure that the more you understand how all these pieces fit together to create one customer experience, the better we're going to make the product. And one of the things that I love about this team is they love that. Like, there's every time someone gets more and more exposure to the full breadth of the business, you just start to see lights go on and people get really excited about how to solve challenges and problems. And so I think that, to me, is an important aspect of the culture. Is we work with a very broad and diverse set of skills and populations in this company. And people obviously get energy from understanding that entire breadth, as opposed to having a company that just does one thing.
Yeah, that's really thoughtful. Well, we incredibly appreciate all your time today. We know that your schedule is busier than ever. So many different aspects. I learned so much just, in the last hour here together. And, if I could have gone back and shared some of your advice with myself, I think I would have also, to me, one of the things that, just really notable is just how transparent, and thoughtful you are about your own career and how it applies to other people. And I think Blue Apron's very lucky to have you at the helm. And I'm extra excited to keep getting my meal kits now going forward.
Well, I feel very lucky to be here because it's an incredible team, and frankly, a product where it's not everybody gets to work for a company where you wake up every morning knowing that your product actually positively impacts people's lives, their health, their connection to their family, and their day. And that's something that's pretty rewarding. So I consider myself the lucky one.
Great. Well, thank you for everyone that's joining us today. We have some more incredible interviews coming up, including with the CEO of NerdWallet. And thank you again, Linda, for your time, for your transparency, for your thoughtfulness and your wisdom. And we're all going to be excited to see where Blue Apron goes in the future. So thanks again.
Thanks so much.